Perfect. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for everybody dialing in today. We're excited to be in the Hackathon for Social Good with KSU this year. Keep in mind, following today's Q&A session, we'll share the PowerPoint and the recording for people to reference back. And then starting on Saturday, keep in mind that BlackRock team members and volunteers will be active in Discord to kind of answer questions, talk about the challenge. And I definitely encourage you to kind of engage with the BlackRock team outside of the challenge. Feel free to network, get to know them, their role, their roles and responsibilities. Use the channel and the BlackRock volunteers and any capacity. My name is Lucas. I'm a KSU alumni, and I work with BlackRock on the consultant relations team. I am kind of leading the point of contact for the hackathon this year. So I'm excited for the students to see the challenge and to see what we've proposed, as well as kind of learn a little bit about our business. I'm joined by Colin Mack today, who he's a software engineer and a member of our core API and service platform team, and that's within the Aladdin Wealth Tech business. So you'll learn a little bit about Aladdin and BlackRock and where they connect. If you haven't attended one of our previous speaker sessions, it's interesting, the relationship of Aladdin and BlackRock and how our business is built on BlackRock, and it is a kind of competitive advantage for the firm. For today's session, I'll kind of start by sharing a little bit about the firm, our clients, our business, as well as some key kind of just like vocab, industry lingo words that you'll want to be familiar with as you kind of look at the challenge, and I'm sure kind of Googling the industry and BlackRock. And then Colin provides some background on kind of working with APIs, relevant languages, kind of a high level of web apps, and then we'll kind of open up for questions. So kind of jumping over to the deck, a little bit about the firm. We're 30 years ago, founded in New York City, currently 16,000 employees with $8 trillion in assets under management. Lots of numbers there, but on this kind of timeline, specific to the challenge, I want to point out that 20 years ago introduced iShares ETFs. I'll talk a little bit about ETFs becoming popular in the market, because what ETFs do is they allow investors to identify kind of a profile or a theme or a industry of interest. It could be a country, an industry, a screening, a factor, or whatever it may be, but it allows kind of everyday investors to gain access to very specific criteria at a low cost. So affordability and availability is a theme we'll kind of hear today. And also I want to point out in the last 5 years, you'll see that third kind of bullet down, interest sustainability as a central part to how we invest, integrating ESG throughout our business. So ESG, environmental, sustainability, and governance. Sometimes you'll see the S as social, but for the sakes of today, environmental, sustainability, and governance. And I think it's important to note, when you're looking at the challenge, you're thinking about the industry, sustainability really being a central part to our business. And it's relatively new to the industry, new to BlackRock. So we're still looking, how do we embed ESG themes and mindsets and responsibility kind of across our entire business. So it thinks about how BlackRock employees interact with information, but also how BlackRock clients and kind of prospective clients interact with information, and how is ESG defined and sustainability defined across those different groups. So ETFs, very important when you think about the challenge. You start brainstorming ideas, and there's sustainability being embedded across our entire business. So kind of two things to kind of call out there. Jumping over to kind of who are our clients. I mean, BlackRock ultimately helps millions of people save and retire. We work alongside institutions and financial advisors as they help clients kind of plan their financial goals. And planning their financial goals is a theme to definitely think of when you're thinking about the challenge and reviewing the challenge. I mean, ultimately, our goal as a firm is making quality investing options more available and more affordable. And when you think about available, one of the key things to think about is where does somebody start? We know there's a lot of apps out there. There's a lot of websites out there. There's research sources, there's blogs, and I mean, it's very popular with kind of timely topic, everything that we've seen on Reddit and Robinhood and all of those platforms. Information sharing is abundant today, so the availability is there. And in recent years, being more affordable with trading costs being eliminated by many firms, but availability, for the sake of the challenge, thinking about where can people start? Is it an app? Is it a web page? What's the resource for someone to get started? And ultimately, by deploying those resources, we're investing in the communities that our clients are in, have better financial futures. So what's the journey? Again, where do people start? Where are people getting their information? How are they really being influenced to make investment decisions? Jumping over to kind of the next slide, it's what makes BlackRock different. And I think it begins with the fact that we are client first, looking to address unique needs, but we also take it very personal to kind of understand clients' unique needs. So kind of back to the challenge, where are we accessing that information to understand clients? Today and historically, it's been very conversational. So it's qualitative information sharing, but where is that information kind of being input to then kind of output a recommendation or some type of profile? And this is kind of where ESG comes into play. I mentioned ESG is relatively new to the industry, new to our firm when it comes to day-to-day conversations. I think it's always been a part of conversation, but kind of being a day-to-day requirement is that we've seen more recently. When we're thinking about ESG, it's how are we delivering it consistently with friendly tools? Is it with digital experiences to kind of evolve solutions over time for future client needs, emerging client needs that we don't even necessarily know exist, but while we're gathering information, while we're building interfaces to interact with clients, being able to gather information that helps us kind of address emerging and future needs. So when we're thinking about the challenge, we know we offer a breadth of kind of investment products and solutions, but what digital resources can be used to educate clients on environmental topics, define unique kind of client profiles? How do investors understand sustainability? Well, what does sustainability mean for companies that are looking to invest in or buy their stock? And kind of what data is out in the world that can be packaged in a way that's relatively user friendly and absorbable to someone who's not a data scientist or a financial professional, but in a data that's packaged in a way that someone can just make a confident financial decision. And kind of that last bullet there, risk management, I think that's something to always keep in mind when you're thinking about BlackRock and when you're thinking about financial services and asset management. Risk management can be defined in many, many ways. Traditionally, it is defined in the most basic way, the possibility of losing based on the initial investment. But risk is kind of so much more than that. It's when you talk about an investor profile, could it be something? It's risky for me as a person, in my personal opinion, to have exposure to a company or an industry that I don't necessarily have values that align with. So that could be a personal risk. Isn't always defined as the possibility of losing value, but also it's gaining exposure to an industry, to a company, to a region that your day-to-day values and ethics aren't necessarily aligned with. And kind of jumping over to the next slide there, it's integrating processes is kind of critical. And how are we integrating the E, the S, and the G across all aspects of internal BlackRock, as well as client interactions with BlackRock? One may be interested in global warming, one may be interested in emissions, one may be interested in diversity and inclusion, corporate responsibility. When we think about social good, what are BlackRock solutions kind of uncovering, and what are we doing to kind of formalize and understand where and how and why we're to be meeting clients' individual needs? We'll get into it in a second. We're kind of thinking about institutional versus retail. Will be a really kind of eye-opening moment to kind of individual needs versus broader. And when it comes to meeting needs, I think we've increased access to themed and kind of factor investing by adding sustainable solutions to our product offering. If you're familiar with iShares, they have a lots of kind of ESG focused products there. I think that's a website you'll probably visit when you're looking at the challenge. But for the kind of sake of this conversation, ETFs, industry leading research are really kind of a key piece of how we're integrating ESG opportunities and people's kind of investment process from kind of research and discovery to actually making a transaction to kind of thinking about long-term holdings. And then I'll kind of jump over to the last slide here. And here's Aladdin. I think Aladdin's very critical to BlackRock's business, and it's really our operating system that allows us to operate on a single platform across the firm. And kind of what that means is single point of data entry, single point of data extract. I don't want to say single point of code, but yeah, you're kind of thinking about it that way, and really it's our engine to everything we do, from research, portfolio modeling, calculating analytics, and even kind of generating test scenarios. Aladdin's used kind of as that central location of kind of data, and kind of like the Bible of our standard of data is, does it meet the requirements to go into the system? And ultimately, Aladdin enables our clients to kind of access high quality insights, see scenarios, see analytics, perform kind of analysis, and then it goes back to making more informed investment decisions. It's kind of two things I really want to focus: tools to investors to make informed decision, and then being sure that those tools are available when someone's ready to get started. And then kind of last, before Colin jumps over to his walk through kind of APIs, a few key words to kind of know. When you're looking at a challenge, there's going to be words that you're just maybe not familiar with. I can say I was not familiar with this terminology at all until I started working here. But ESG, it's kind of the social good piece: environmental, social, and corporate governance, and that refers to kind of central factors of measuring kind of the impact of not only an investment, but the impact of an organization, the impact of an individual. So you'll see ESG a lot. Retail versus institutional. So those are our two investor types. Retail would be like the folks on this call today, you and I, if we were looking to purchase stocks, bonds, make some type of financial investment through a brokerage account of some sort, that would categorize us as a retail investor. An institutional investor is more of a organization who's managing money on behalf of a larger group. So that could be a sovereign bank, a insurance company, a pension, a corporation, a foundation, an endowment, a group of an organization managing on behalf of a larger group. Asset class is important to know, but think fixed income, securities, equities, real estate, alternatives, multi-asset. There's so many ways to kind of invest your money outside of stocks and bonds, and that all of those kind of fall under the category of asset class. I think for the sake of our challenge and our exercise, equities, bonds, ETFs, and mutual funds will be the kind of what is kind of important and what you should be most familiar with. You'll see a lot of really interesting materials on alternatives, because you'll think of solar panels, clean energy, energy storage, that tangible kind of assets fall into the alternative space. But for the sake of the challenge, equities, think of stocks, investing in a company, bonds, an investment instrument, where it's kind of like a loan is the most basic way to think about it, typically through a corporation or kind of a government entity. ETFs are kind of a bundle of equities or bonds potentially that retail investors generally have. There's a low point of entry, low point of cost to kind of access. Mutual funds is kind of like this isn't the most formal way to say it, but kind of an ETF on steroids, where there's a lot more requirements, as usually a higher point of entry, and the way their day-to-day value is calculated is a little different than the. And then I'll end on investor profile. I'm looking to start investing. I want to kind of know what company. I don't know where to start, what companies align with my morals and values and my ethics? How much risk am I willing to take? What's the amount of money I'm looking to start with? Do I have any dependents? Do I have any debt? There's a lot of factors that kind of go into building an investor's profile that can ultimately have a huge influence on potential investments they may make down the road. And then there's a I mean, we could keep going on the vocab, but these are kind of the key ones to kind of think about. But one that's not on here is the risk piece. I want to be sure that everyone understands that risk is not exclusive to the value of assets put in decreasing, but risk is also being exposed to themes and industries, organizations that just don't align with your day-to-day kind of values and ethics and what you would like to put your money towards. I know that's a lot of information. We'll definitely share the slides. But with that, I will pass over to Colin, and then we will open up for questions following his walkthrough.
Thank you, Lucas.
So I will stop my screen share.
Okay, I am attempting right now to give permission to start my own screen share. I apparently don't have that set, so I'm doing that right now. Okay, looks like, okay, I'm actually having some issues with that. Do you have would you be willing to share, Lucas, for me? Okay, thank you. It doesn't have to quit the application to give it permission, so rather than exit the call and jump back in.
No worries.
Easier. Sorry about that, everyone.
Give me 1 second. Firing it up.
Well, as he's doing that, I'll just say, like, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our presentation. As Lucas mentioned, I've been working for BlackRock for a good amount of time now. I am on our APIs team, so I do work a lot with APIs. And if you haven't worked specifically with BlackRock in the past, which I wouldn't expect you to have unless you've done another hackathon, or if you haven't worked with APIs specifically, or not APIs maybe related to finance or big data, I am going to be talking to you a little bit about that. But I think to start out, I will just sort of recap a little bit of what Lucas has already said, but sort of from the mindset of how are you going to start applying this to the challenge. I think Lucas did a good job of that. I think that he stole a lot of things I was going to say, which is great. I'm glad he did. But yeah, I'll sort of start with that little bit of a recap. Do you mind going to the next slide, Lucas? Okay, so looking at our presentation, or looking at going into the hackathon and thinking about like what is going to make a good presentation, I think the place to start with that is to think about like what BlackRock does. And so Lucas just sort of went through a lot of that. Lucas, next slide, if you don't mind. But when you want to think about BlackRock and what sort of the point of all of the software development that we do behind the scenes, what the point of it is to help our decision makers who control money to be making smarter decisions on where to put that money. And if that sounds like a totally foreign concept to you, that's completely okay. I think actually to look at this from the perspective of ESG, as he's talking about like environmental, social governance, I think one of the best examples that Lucas did mention was alternatives. If that word doesn't mean anything to you, then maybe just think about like real things, like what you can buy that will have some sort of value. And so he mentioned solar panels. That's a great one. And one that I always like to bring up is windmills. So, you've probably seen windmills, perhaps, depending on where you are. You might see like enormous, like huge ones that are enormous, and who knows how much power they're generating. But if you think about how good those are, perhaps for the environment, and as far as creating energy and that being a good investment, think about how expensive it would be for you or me or anyone you know to buy and install a windmill. Obviously, it's crazy expensive, millions and millions of dollars. And what BlackRock is able to do is, yes, they have a ton of money, but that's not really the point. It's not just for BlackRock to put money where they want it to be. The point is to sort of collect resources and say, okay, we have Colin. He wants to invest in a windmill. He thinks it's a great thing for the environment. He thinks it's a great investment. We have Lucas. We have Adriana. All these people that really are interested in purchasing a windmill. And what BlackRock can do is to say, okay, well, we can pool money from each person and sort of split it up in a way that you have a lot of people contributing towards something they care about and also making a smart investment decision. And that's also the way to be thinking about ETFs, which Lucas mentioned. The whole concept behind ETFs is this idea that if you were saying to yourself, like, hey, I think tech is a great investment, I want to invest in tech, you could go out into Robinhood or TD Ameritrade, whatever app you want, and try to invest in every single tech company. And if tech does do well in the future, then great, because you've invested in every single tech company and you do super well. Or BlackRock could say to itself, we are going to invest in every single tech company. So now we've invested in like the Amazons, Apples, Googles, all the companies you think of in tech. And we are going to produce a product called an ETF for you to say, hey, if you put $100, we'll give you one stock of this ETF. And as all these tech companies go up, the value of that stock also goes up. So you buy it for just $100, and for $100, you own every single tech company. That's a cool feeling. And then as tech goes up, as Amazon goes up, as Apple goes up, your $100 investment all of a sudden is worth maybe $102 or $105. And that's all good stuff. That's the whole concept of an ETF. And so how would you know that tech or a windmill, for example, is a good investment? If you're the type of person that just follows the news, or you just are generally aware of things, whether it's social media, whatnot, you might feel like you have a general sense of what a good investment is or where the future might be going. And if you're like BlackRock, if you're like me, I like to think that investment and care for the environment is a big part of the future. I think it's important. I think it's good for everyone. And I think that that's something worth investing in. So if that is your opinion, how do you know that? What sort of things do you want to know about investing in the environment in order to actually make that decision? And it doesn't have to be the environment. So now I'll actually talk about the slide that's in front of you. Obviously just a bunch of pictures, but at the top here we have just sort of some concepts, I guess, or at least they represent concepts. The leaves, I'm sort of thinking about the environment. The world, the globe we have there, I'm thinking about like world news. That building with pillars is I saw as like a political type building. So politics obviously influences decision making. And then just a short little graph, which obviously like numbers would be very important to you. And all of that is great, right? You can read the news, you can learn about all of that. And what you want to get out of it really as an investor is everything kind of on bottom. You want to see charts where you can see the direction that things are going. You want to see representations of all this data in ways that are easy to understand. So this isn't to specifically say that a project or a concept should revolve around taking data and making a graph at the end of it. If you do, that's fantastic. But sort of what the whole point is that when investors or when you or me has to make a decision, we'll feel a lot better about making it if we have as much data as possible represented in a way that is most clear or influential as possible. And I think that's really sort of the challenge is, you know, a whole wealth of data out there. How do you turn it into something that you can actually get information from? Could you go to the, wait, let me see what the next slide is first. Not yet, not next slide yet. But point is, this is a very real, like, I mean, the challenge that is, being presented to you guys is very real in the sense that almost every tool that I work on and that so many other developers at BlackRock do work on is about creating some sort of nugget that can be retrieved from the wide, breadth of data that exists in the world and news and trends and everything that takes place. How do you condense it all into something that is easy for someone to understand? Or if you're someone that's completely new to investing, how is it in a way that you can start to learn more about it? And so I think those are a couple routes to take. We can go ahead and go on to the next slide now. So the best way as a developer to start incorporating various data and services into some sort of hack or application or something, website, is via APIs. So if you can go on to the next slide. So the whole concept, of course, of an API, which hopefully, I don't know if everyone on here like knows API super well. If you're completely new, I will pretend as though it is completely new to you. But the whole point is that as you develop code, there's a whole lot you could do by yourself, but there's also a lot that other people have already done and have made readily available for you to use if you just make a request. So the whole concept of an API is that if you're running code in server 1, and there is some sort of process or data that exists in server 2, if you make a request, it will send back a response. So let's just say that server 2 is a simple like addition server, and it just takes in two numbers and returns the sum of the two numbers back to you. Then maybe my request is 1 plus 2, and what's returned back is 3. So that's the simplest form of a API. And if you have ever used a URL, that is essentially an API. What you're essentially saying is, I want to see www.google.com. You send that request to the internet, and it returns back a web page, which is Google. And then even as you search within Google, that's of course triggering an API within Google's servers to return a page ranking for what you're searching for. And that's basically the whole concept of APIs. As you work on your projects, I think it will be an important thing to bear in mind that any development work that you could do yourself that sounds very complicated, there's definitely a chance that there is an API that readily provides it. So that's just something to consider. It's not a guarantee. And I'll go a little more into that in the next slide. So when you are trying to search for APIs, just to know sort of what you might be looking for, there's sort of three types that I think are relatively common. This is not based on any sort of like official page. This is the Colin Mack introduction to APIs. But the first one is data. So as you can see in the example there, it's for the most part reaching out to a server and saying, hey, you have data, I want it, send it back to me, and it will do so for the most part. Next would sort of be transactional, where you are asking the server to do something for you. That would be similar to the addition server that I referenced, where if you're just saying, hey, add these two numbers, then it will send back a response. But it's not always that. It could be just about anything else. Sometimes that transactional response isn't even anything that it sends back to you. For example, if you made if there was an API, and I know these exist from companies like Twilio, for example, you can send a transaction that says like, hey, send out a text message to various users, and it might just send back a response like, okay, sure, I did it. You don't have any evidence of that, but what the server is doing on its own backend is sending out text messages to a list of clients or something. That's what I sort of would think of as sort of transactional APIs. And then last is authentication. I don't figure you guys will have to deal with very much authentication for hackathon apps, just because you probably don't want to deal too much with authentication. But what it mostly comes down to, and you'll see it a lot with any website, if you've ever logged into a website, you've probably used an authentication API where you're sending in a username and a password, perhaps a token, perhaps it's all encrypted with some sort of token. And the response you'll get back is basically Boolean of like, yes or no, you have access or you don't. You probably won't try to incorporate authentication into your APIs you are using, but that is certainly a good way of just sort of remembering the rules of APIs. Lucas, you can go ahead onto the next slide. So yeah, how do they relate to the challenge that you guys are going to deal with? Basically, the world is full of APIs and information. Some of it relates to news, some relates to the environment, sentiment, that kind of thing, the opinions that people feel about one thing or another. And the best thing you can kind of produce is just a way to kind of simplify it. So take all of these concepts that are taking place around the world and try to condense it into something that an investor could make a smart decision off of. So if you're able to find convincing data, perhaps about the environmental laws in a certain country and it's affecting their air pollution and all that sort of thing, that kind of information, simply representing it in an easy to understand way and representing maybe which companies are involved in those countries, that is just a off the top of my head hack that could be done using APIs. Not saying it's perfect for this project, not saying it's readily available, I'm not sure. But that is the concept. And I do put at the bottom that BlackRock used to have our own APIs that we would present for these hackathons. They were always a bit in disarray. They did not have great documentation back then. So we have retired them for now, but we hope they will be back. You can go ahead on to the next slide. Okay, so if you're thinking to yourself, like, that's a lot of information, Colin, and that sounds cool, but I don't really know how I would actually go from knowing that APIs are out there to knowing how I incorporate it into my project. You can go ahead on to the next slide. So if APIs are completely new to you, then I hope you at least know that there are like a lot of resources that are out there to help you execute them. And as you learn to execute them, it will become even easier to use them. I wish I could share my screen right now so I could show these examples specifically. But for the most part, I mentioned that to simply typing in like www.google.com is technically using, a sort of API within your web browser connecting to a server that's providing a web page. But a web browser in general is a pretty common way to execute an API. As we look at types of APIs, you'll see for the most part, if you've never used them, they look the same as URL. It's usually HTTPS, a namespace, and arguments. So it's something you've totally seen before. So yes, you can always execute your APIs through the web browser. Also, if you enjoy using your terminal on your computer, certainly making curl requests is another way to execute APIs. And then API documentation, I'll skip over Postman real quick to just say, as you find these APIs on the internet, they should have documentation that should tell you how to execute them. If they don't, and once again, BlackRock's didn't really, so we're not perfect. A good amount of them are kind of lazy with documentation, but often there will be explanations on how to use them. And then I will sort of finish with Postman. I know I say it in your code there as well, but if you haven't ever used Postman, it is an interface for executing APIs. I wish I could show it right now, but if you were to download it, it's relatively easy to use. And it also includes buttons where you can export the API call that you're using to various different kinds of code. So if you're thinking you want to do something in JavaScript or in Python or any sort of Node application, it will literally export the code you need from Postman, to something you can copy and paste into your code. And then it's super easy from there. At least it should work right out of the box. But it might involve some tweaking, but nonetheless, it should, for the most part, work out of the box. Could you go to the next slide, Lucas? Okay, and then so lastly, just some resources. I once again put BlackRock in the corner there just to know that like if you want to use BlackRock APIs one day, it could be possible. But since you cannot at the moment, the alternatives, we do provide with our challenge, which I don't think if it hasn't been dropped yet, maybe you can't necessarily access it, but we do have a page that does have helpful resources for a lot of data. Some of them are government resources. A lot of them are using something called open data, which I don't know a lot about, but it's there. And for the most part, finding good environmental data will often be through some sort of government resource. That being said, since part of the challenge obviously is the financial component, I have like Google and Yahoo Finance as options there. Those will pretty readily replace the BlackRock APIs to an extent. If you're looking for current information on how a certain company is doing, its stock price, that sort of thing, Yahoo and Google Finance do offer APIs. My understanding is that their documentation also isn't perfect. So it's not just a BlackRock problem. Documentation can be difficult to maintain because as developers, we want to do as many things as possible and we don't want to stop to have to document it. So it's a flaw. We are collectively working on it, I'm sure. And then lastly, as far as a resource, I mentioned Rapid API. There might be alternatives to Rapid API. I have friends that work at Rapid API. They haven't paid me to compliment them. I genuinely think it has a great marketplace for learning more about APIs. Within their marketplace, you can search for anything you want, really. Like it could be finance, it could be weather, it could be environmental, it could be just about anything. I've done it myself for environmental. It's not perfect. They have some APIs that could be helpful, but I'm not entirely sure. It offers there is you have to build an account with Rapid API, but through Rapid API, you can get a subscription to some of the APIs. So, some services that are offered by anyone, by companies, by organizations, they will make you pay for it, which fortunately, like through Rapid API, you can find the free ones or you can find the freemium ones, which means that you have some access for free, but there is a premium alternative. I think for hackathon purposes, I probably would not invest in one of the APIs, but that's obviously entirely up to you. But these are just some what I think are great resources. I also know that Rapid API has that export feature where when you've tested an API within their interface, you can or export it to code of your choosing, so Python, JavaScript, Java, anything. So definitely some great resources to use. and definitely would be applicable to what we're hoping to see out of the BlackRock hackathon projects. So that was a lot of information. Once again, I apologize that I can't currently share my screen. If during like Q&A, I have the chance to leave and jump back into the call, I could perhaps share my screen. But yeah, cross the bridge when we get there. I believe that's the last slide, except for a thank you. So I will say what it says. Yes, thank you for joining. And definitely, if you have any questions, definitely just let me know.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Colin. Adriana, do we want to open up? If there are any questions, feel free to come up with you or drop them in the chat. But I will encourage the students that are here. We will be in Discord. I'll be the most frequenter in Discord next week. Colin will be there for a designated time. We'll communicate that in Discord. And then we have a few other folks from the Aladdin team, as well as just kind of client services in general, all throughout next week. I will share our kind of schedule spreadsheet in the Discord channel, maybe on Monday once it's final. But if you don't have questions now, definitely keep in mind that Discord will be kind of our primary communication next week.
For those students that are already part of our Discord, I will go ahead and drop the link to join in the chat. But like Lucas said, this is your time to ask questions, get real-time answers that might help you when you guys are working on this challenge. So please feel free to ask students.
And I do know it was a lot of information, but I think Colin and I are limited to go any further without questions, without giving away our challenge. All right, so I will take silence as a flawless delivery. And like I said, we will, Colin and I, mostly me, but Colin at some point will be available in the Discord chat next week. So if any questions do come up, I know it's you guys haven't seen the challenge yet, but definitely encourage you to spend some time just exploring the resources that Colin went over today. Abundance of information when it comes to APIs and just data that's available, whether it's for this challenge, future challenges, or projects you're working on in the classroom. We're super excited for next week. So yeah, I guess we can have one more last all call. If there are any questions, feel free to speak up now, or you'll have to sleep on it until early next week.
Thank you to the people that have thanked us in the chat. I can see. Thank you for the compliment.
All right, well, with that, I guess I will go ahead and stop recording this session. Students, just so you know, this will be available tonight, both on YouTube and in Discord.